Landlord calls my job to tell on me, so I get evidence to expose her fake disability to the state. Here's what happened. Subscribe to Am I the Jerk on YouTube and hit the bell for notifications. I lived in an illegal rental in a place you'd call a landlord's market. There was a housing shortage, and although I had a great job, no credit problems, no background issues, it was impossible to rent somewhere affordable because of my dog. I eventually found a great place, but it came with a nutty landlord. She lived on the property. I'm not a choosing beggar, however, so I take it. For 12 months, I endured the landlord's violation of my rights, taking deposits she shouldn't have, micromanaging my personal life and my guests, and it's overall pretty awful. She's always on painkillers with tiny pin needle pupils, telling me weird stuff and trapping me in conversations I'd rather not hear. Faced with homelessness, I take the trampling of my rights and privacy. She made me miserable. After a year, I had enough. She crossed the line when she had my boyfriend removed by the police when I was at work one day. He had been staying less than 48 hours. I was gone for 2 weeks and had arrived back to my rental 48 hours before this. No one was in my rental while I was gone. On top of tossing my boyfriend out, she delivered a bill for his rent and utilities for staying the past 2 weeks that I was gone. No one was in my house. She already bullied me. I guess she thought she could extort me too. She created fake paperwork to intimidate me. The bills I received from her are insane. They are not the writings of a lucid human. She gets all sorts of details wrong and makes personal statements that are inappropriate. The place was empty and I was gone, but she wrote a bill and insisted I pay for his tenancy. This was when I'd had enough. I finally stand my ground. Extortion is the limit. Everything is falsified. I think it was the Vicodin talking and making her brave. As an aside that will be super relevant later, her employer had an open fraud case against her. She told me early in my tenancy because she dared them to come after her. Perhaps she shouldn't have dared so hard. After the fake tenancy debacle, it gets real. I take off work to read up on my rights and protect my dog and stuff. She starts harassing me. Specifically, she did all of these things over the course of a few days. 1. Called from a blocked number and asked for a stripper or call girl. 2. Called my work as a new landlord seeking a reference and told them I was partying, trying to get me fired and saying that was why I wasn't at work. 3. Came into my yard at 11 at night, stomped up on my porch to scare me, then walked out of the yard, saying it was a free country when asked what the heck she was doing. 4. Called the Humane Society and told them I had a vicious dog on the loose who had attacked her dog. And 5. Called the police and sent them to my job. I work with kids, claiming she found substances in my house. Needless to say, I was pretty freaked out by all of these things. I got a TRO against her. She couldn't keep trying to ruin my career and get my dog euthanized and attempting to intimidate me. It was good for 3 years. I was happy I won in court. It was a great move for my safety and empowerment. However, when I did move, about 10 days after her extortion, she falsified documents, kept my deposit, and I was forced to go back to court to get my money. Again, I won, and although it took a lot of time and energy, eventually it was garnished from her account. I not only got out of my lease, rightfully, but took my deposit money back against her will. I had a restraining order for 3 years, and she didn't know my new address. I was thrilled. The torment she put me through was unbelievable. Now, let's get to the revenge. Remember that fraud case she boasted about? Well, it came back to bite her. Landlord boldly did construction, flying high on Vicodin while collecting disability because she was wheelchair-bound. See the issue here? She played the system to get into paid early retirement, ate pills all day, increased her property value by building up her space, and collected money from illegal rentals. 4 months before I moved out, she was doing construction, and I had a strange feeling I should document her fraud. I knew she could turn on me at any point. And, well, I'm sure glad I had the foresight to do so. She had gone to work the first day of her contract and fallen out of a wheelchair on a ramp that was not up to code. Almost 4 weeks later to the day, she was happily at home continuing with her activities, building a tool shed from scratch. She was doing construction with no wheelchair. She was bold and figured she could never get caught. She was doing all sorts of physical activity. I decided to film her and make sure the date was noted. I also took pictures. Some part of me just knew I should document what I was seeing because she was an awful human being who was leeching off the system. She worked in education and she couldn't be fired. Her position was tenured, and she was holding her spot while on medical leave for over 4 years. They legally couldn't hire a new teacher. Substitutes poured in and out of her classroom. Hundreds of children missed out on a legitimate education because she held her spot. She was scum. I worked in a similar field, so I knew what damage she was doing with her actions. Back to the eviction/TRO event. Shortly after moving out, when the restraining order was in effect, I went to her employer and offered evidence in his fraud case. It was a serious state-led fraud case against her. They were going after her. He was elated that I had such strong evidence. He put me in touch with private investigators. I handed over the evidence after sitting down with them and giving my statement of her activity and how she was mobile at home. I didn't have to exaggerate, and I didn't have to lie. I just told them exactly what happened. Even if she didn't burn me, I felt like I was doing my civic duty by ensuring the kids had a real teacher in their classroom instead of this piece of garbage. Months later, I called the investigators and found out my evidence was what really sealed the deal. She was convicted of disability fraud. She was fired from her position and potentially going to pay back years' worth of disability payments. I did that. I'm the reason her scam fell apart. She thought she could bully me into extortion. She didn't. She thought she could ruin my career and hurt my dog when I stood up to her. She didn't. In fact, I won. It was what I needed to feel empowered after all the crap she put me through. It wasn't even revenge as much as standing up for myself. If she did have to pay it back, she'd only have her house to pay with. My dream is that she lost her house, ended up a renter, and just hopes for a kind landlord. This lady is the definition of a jerk. Not only is she bullying and trying to extort our original poster, but she's also faking a disability at a tenured position. Come on now. Tenure means you got it easy. You just gotta phone it in for the rest of your career. They can't fire you. You don't even need to try. All you gotta do is show up. And she couldn't even manage to pull that off. She just wanted to sit home eating pills all day. Clearly, it had affected her judgment. Otherwise, she would have realized what a bad idea all of this is. You're ticking off your tenants like this and they know what you're up to, then they're not exactly gonna be on your side. You might be able to get away with being a jerk for a while, but trust me, those people you're being a jerk to are looking for any way they can to screw you over. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below. And don't forget to subscribe. Karen refuses to hear me out when I'm just trying to explain to her that her car's about to be towed. I work security for a private business campus that has venues that are often rented by outside groups. One particularly large hall was rented by a local church group, and we sold their tickets at the box office immediately in front of the venue. Without going into boring detail, there was only one way into the hall for the general public, but numerous exits with cameras everywhere. Parking is free in all 3 of our parking decks, except in clearly marked reserved spaces, which will be important soon. While visitors were still arriving for the event, our dispatch center received a call from our largest campus tenants complaining that there was a car parked in one of their 24/7 reserved spaces and they need it moved ASAP. This company pays for these spaces and is constantly using them at all hours of the day and on weekends, which is why we have numerous highly visible signs for this row of spaces warning people of this fact and that towing is enforced. We reviewed camera footage and saw that the owner was a woman dressed in fine Sunday clothes that were an almost painful shade of lime green with a matching hat. This would have been enough to identify her even in our large hall. But we then noticed that she bypassed the ticket line and made her way to one of the venue exit doors. She stayed there for several minutes, and when one of the cleaning staff exited, she slipped in behind them. We're still not sure how she knew she could do this. As the supervisor on duty, I entered the hall and found her in one of the front rows sitting in a group of people. She saw me coming in my security uniform and immediately scrunched up her face. "Ma'am, can I?"
"Now, I just sat down. What is it you want?"
She was already on the defensive and loud, not a sign of innocence in my experience. "I'm with campus security, and I need to ask—"
"What you need to do is leave me alone. I'm sitting with my family, and we're here to enjoy my nephew's concert. Ain't nothing so important you rent-a-cops need to be bothering me like this."
"Actually, it is important. If you wouldn't mind coming with me, we can talk in the aisle and—"
"No, you ain't kicking me out of here at my nephew's church concert."
Now she starts avoiding eye contact with me. She thinks I'm here because she didn't buy a ticket, but I don't care about that. I'm trying to tell her about her car before we have to tow it. This is her only chance to move it herself. "Ma'am, I'm not here about how you got inside this hall.
I don't know what you're talking about, but you need to leave me the heck alone."
At this point, it was so comical that I remember getting the biggest smile on my face and telling her, "That's all I needed to hear. Enjoy your show." I left and had her car towed immediately. 2 hours later, she reported her car stolen to our security desk. The desk officer informed her that she'd parked in a reserved spot and that security had tried to make contact with her before the show began, according to our log. She loudly demanded to speak to whoever was in charge, and that's when I came around the corner and introduced myself. The look on her face was priceless, and she didn't say another word as I gave her the information for the tow company's lot, which was closed by that time. This is clearly a woman who thinks the rules don't apply to her. She can just do whatever she wants and no one can tell her otherwise. She assumed you were there because of how she snuck in, which is also a jerk move. But you were actually there to try and do her a favor. Karen was probably aware that she shouldn't have parked where she parked, but let's assume that she somehow missed all the flashing neon signs around her and parked there anyway. You would have saved her quite a bit of time and money for not having to deal with this whole situation. Too bad Karens always think they know better. One of my fellow soldiers tried to get with my wife, so I came up with a plan to ruin his life. This was back in 2013 when I was based in Holland. I'm a British Marine for context. I'd been married to my wife for a little over 18 months when I deployed to Afghanistan. My wife had a job in the British delegation on base and got to know pretty much every Brit and their husband or wife. One day, we were directly targeted by a vehicle-borne IED. Now, whilst it wasn't uncommon for there to be a threat to coalition forces in general, being directly targeted felt more personal for obvious reasons. That was also the day I found out an RAF guy back in Holland had tried it on with my wife. I found him on Facebook, and still feeling rather raw about Terry trying to blow me up, messaged him words to the effect of, "If you go near Mrs. Original Poster again, I will put glass in your throat the next time I see you." The next day, one of my bosses, who was also RAF, messaged me on Facebook to say that this guy has been over to his office and basically tattled on me. He gave me a friendly warning / heads up that this guy could have gone to the MPs and reported me. I have no idea what would have happened, but I acknowledged the warning and said it won't happen again. My boss had my back and actually told him to wind his neck. Fast forward to when I got back from Afghanistan. A few days had passed and I was starting to settle into a normal life again. My wife brought it up after explaining she didn't mention it at the time due to my reaction the first time, that an Army Sergeant Major had tried to message her via Facebook. He told her she was beautiful and wanted her number. She promptly blocked him. I was ticked off to say the least, but I understand why she kept it until I was back on home soil. The next day, I went into our department and spoke to my other boss, an Army captain. I told him what had happened, and he said, "Leave it with me." He basically had a chat with him, and nothing came of it. I felt deflated, and even more ticked off. That was until our senior military officer came into our department. He welcomed me back and asked how my tour was. Still ticked off, I said, "It was good, sir," with the exception of Sergeant Major Jerk trying to get round my wife. He was understandably a little taken aback. About an hour or so later, he emailed me saying that he feels the need to do something official about this. Something I had forgotten was that the colonel and sergeant major belonged to the same regiment, so having one of his own behave like this had clearly gripped him. I told him the full story, and provided screenshots of what Sergeant Major Jerk had said to Mrs. Original Poster. For this to go official, my wife had to provide a statement. Unfortunately, Mrs. Original Poster is very non-confrontational and said she didn't want this to continue. I respected her wishes of not wanting to provide a statement, but hatched a plan that would be 3 years in the making. The timing is important. I emailed the colonel and said that Mrs. Original Poster had declined. However, I felt the need for some formal recognition, so I asked that Sergeant Major Jerk write a letter of apology, addressed to both my wife and I, which is to be signed and dated. It was granted, and I received said letter 2 days later. It said,
I'm writing this letter to both of you to apologize for the torment and anxiety that you both must have felt from the messages you received from my Facebook account. To Mrs. Original Poster, nobody should ever be in a situation where they worry about going to work because of who may come through the door, especially so when they have the added stress of a partner being operationally deployed at the time. The anguish that you must have felt at this time is immeasurable, and for this I apologize. To Original Poster, being operationally deployed is stressful enough, without the added stress and worry about family back home. Support from home and loved ones is what carries many people through tough times whilst on tour. For any undue angst I caused, I apologize. I regret any hurt and anguish caused by this issue, and apologize wholeheartedly and unreservedly to you both. Signed, Sergeant Jerk. I now waited. I saw out the rest of my time in Holland, moved back to the UK to my new base, and waited some more. Almost 3 years after I received the apology letter, I looked up Sergeant Major Jerk's wife on Facebook. I had known the whole time we were out there that he was married. His wife lived back in the UK. He's routinely tried to cheat on her. I sent her the same screenshot which I had sent to the colonel. I also, before leaving Holland, printed off the emails between the colonel and myself where I requested the apology letter. I blanked out the colonel's details. I included pictures of that as well. And then, lastly, I sent a picture of the apology letter, signed and dated by her husband admitting what he had done. Once I saw she had read it, I blocked her. Blocked Sergeant Major Jerk and all his friends who had been out in Holland at the same time. Why 3 years? I remember him saying before he turned into a jerk and tried to hit on my wife that he only had 3 years left to serve. If my timing was correct, he was months away from completing his 22 years and receiving a very nice pension. If his wife decided to go ahead with the divorce, she would take half of said pension and would essentially screw him over for the rest of his life. Honestly, I just feel bad for our Original Poster that all of this even happened. Not only once, but twice with 2 different dudes. Is this like a thing in military culture? You know one of the guys is off deployed and their wife might be feeling lonely, so you take your shot? It's really kinda gross behavior. But the fact that it happened twice in such a short period of time leads me to question how often this actually goes on. Thankfully, our Original Poster's wife handled the situation gracefully and remained loyal. And that's all the reassurance our Original Poster really needs. At the end of the day, there's always the potential for guys to hit on her. It's up to her at that point to say no, and that's exactly what she did. Our jerk in this story got exactly what was coming to him. Original Poster just had the foresight to time it perfectly. My employer docked 2.5 hours a week for lunch whether I took it or not. I worked for prestigious millwork. We made cabinets and custom moldings and things like that. Very, very high-end, working with companies on tight schedules. I was the only truck driver. The company was owned by a husband and wife, and the wife did not like me. They'd implemented mandatory lunches for everyone in the shop and building, etc. But due to the uniqueness of my position, I usually don't have to adhere to stupid rules like that. And I knew it was just a way for them to screw the workers, because a lot of the guys were dedicated and would work through lunch. She finally caught up to me one day and was reviewing my time card and was angry and said, "I don't care, you don't have any excuse. You must take a lunch." I argued the point and said some of the materials I was picking up were critical. She said she didn't care.
So I would go pick up zebra wood that they needed right away at noon, and after the load was loaded, I pulled into Burger King and ignored any phone calls that my manager sent, and got back to the shop 2 hours later. He was livid because he had 3 very expensive clients standing around waiting for me. Needless to say, I never had to take a lunch again. I mean, in a lot of cases, yes, you should be making sure your employees are in fact taking their lunch. But truck drivers do tend to work on a slightly different schedule than other types of jobs. I'm not saying that's something I agree with. I still believe they should be able to get their break and go get their food when they need to get food, but it is kind of the current way of the world. At the end of the day, if this stuff was so important for these clients, why are we waiting till the day of to pick it up? Why wasn't this in the shop a couple days ago ready to go? The driver should be able to take their break without being harassed by phone calls and rushed to get to where they need to be. If things have been properly timed out, there shouldn't be any pressure on them. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. Or if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Jerk, give Am I the Genius a shot. Everything linked in the description.